So good morning, everybody, and welcome to our first webinar for Management Case for November. So I hope you can all see me all right. So I've put my camera on. I won't have it on the whole session, but it's nice, I think, if you can see me, see who I am. So I'm Louise, and I'm the tutor at Viva for Management Case. So hope you can see, hear, and all is good. I must apologise. I've got a bit of a cold, so I might sound a wee bit muffly, but hopefully you'll be able to hear me all right. And if I sneeze, many apologies. So good morning, Helen. So first of all, before we get into Shinyglas, which of course was released yesterday, so hopefully you've been able to download that and perhaps print it off as well. Might even have managed to read through it, but we're going to start doing that today anyway. Now, I know there are lots of you with me today, which is really good. And some of you, of course, will be already booked on our courses, which is great. So if you're with me today on the standard course, that means you're going to be joining me for the webinars. And on the webinars, we go through the pre-scene. And we also think about P2, E2, F2, and how those topics that you know could be applied to Shinyglas in the exam. If you're on the elite course, then you're doing all that with me. And also, we are going to have some workshops where we will think more about exams. So we'll look at exam technique, and you have mocks to do. And in the debrief workshops, I'll explain what I would have done and how I would have done that mock, so we can develop those good exam skills. Some of you today are with me just tasting out this course, and that's super as well. Nice to have you with us. So if you're not booked on a course with us, you're more than welcome to today's session. And of course, if you want to carry on, you just need to go to vivatuition.com, book on one of those courses. And if anyone has any queries about sort of the admin side, so things to do perhaps with payment for courses or booking on courses or those types of issues, it's not me. I'm the tutor to teach you and hold your hands through Management Case, but I'm not that person. So anyone with any queries to do more with payments and courses and dates and things like that, I will give you the email address that you need to be able to then contact the customer services team, who will be able to answer your queries. So just a little bit about me, just so that you know who I am. So I've been teaching CIMA for many, 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 many years, too many years, really. And I've been teaching case study since CIMA first introduced any case study. So initially, many years ago, they only introduced a strategic case. And I've been teaching case study ever since they introduced that. Love case studies, think they're fabulous because we can actually apply our knowledge, put our E2, F2 and P2 knowledge and understanding to the test in a real applied situation. So I've been teaching case studies, for many, many years. Also, obviously, teaching other aspects of accountancy qualifications. So the E pillar, the F pillar, been teaching those for years and years and years. More recently, the P pillar as well. So hopefully you're in good hands. Okay, then. So I think I'm going to switch off my camera. If you've got any questions, what we normally do on the webinars is if you pop your question in the question and answer box, which you should be able to have access to, then at the end of the session, I'll leave sort of 10 minutes and I'll go through all of those questions that I can. And anything I can answer, I'll answer. So if you've got any thoughts as we go through the pre-scene, don't keep them to yourself, pop them in the questions and answers, and we can have a little chat about those. So all questions I'll answer at the end rather than during the course of the webinar. If you're on our elite course, so you're going to join me for the workshop, the workshops are far more interactive in that you can ask me a question anytime throughout the whole of the workshop, and we'll have a lot more sort of two-way conversation. But for the webinars, we leave the questions till the end, but I will happily answer any of those. Okay, then. So I'm just going to switch my video off. There we go. Hopefully you can see my screen. So on my screen there, I've got our pre-scene, which in this time around, is Shinyglas. So the plan for this session is that we're going to look through the first half of the pre-scene, more or less. So roughly the first half. And then if you're with me on either of our standard or elite courses, you'll be joining me again on Monday evening UK time at 7 p.m. And we'll do the second half of the pre-scene. So that will include the financial information for Shinyglas and also a competitor. And it will also include those various blogs and newspaper articles that we've got at the end of the pre-scene. So first half of pre-scene today, second half of pre-scene on Monday evening, 7 p.m. UK time. If you're on one of our courses, you'll also be joining me tomorrow. So Sunday, 10 a.m. UK time. And then we've got about an hour session, so a shorter session. But we'll just think about the real life industry that Shinyglas is in. So we'll just get a bit more of a feel for the reality of this market, some of the companies within it, and just make sure that we feel comfortable with the reality of this industry. Okay, then. So let's start. And the first thing I want to talk about is actually why are we studying the pre-scene? Because we need to put this in context of the exam. So in the exam, you will get extra information. So you will have 4 sections in the exam, and each section will give you some additional information. And we're probably talking about half a page of additional information. So when we look at the pre-scene today and on Monday, we're looking at information that we currently have about Shinyglas that we currently know. But on exam day, Shinyglas will have moved along and there will be some situation facing you. It might be that they've decided to upgrade their website, they've developed it. It might be that they're negotiating with new suppliers of glass sealed units. It might be they've got a big problem with staffing. Perhaps they're going to invest in a new factory. There will be a theme in your exam as to what has happened to Shinyglas since the pre-scene. And the questions that you have in your exam will focus on what has happened to Shinyglas in that time, what is presented on exam day. So why are we studying the pre-scene? And it's really important to make sure that we understand the importance of it and also what it isn't. So you will not have exam questions that just relate to this pre-scene. You will have exam questions that relate to something that has happened to Shinyglas since the pre-scene up to your exam day. But studying the pre-scene, what is the purpose? So first of all, this allows CIMA to test you on how you apply your knowledge from E2, F2 and P2. You've learnt that knowledge. You wouldn't be doing this case study exam if you hadn't covered all that knowledge, but they haven't been able to test you on it in a real life applied way. So that is what they're doing by providing the pre-scene. They're giving the context that then we can start to talk about how to manage conflict or how to set up a project team or total quality management, but in the context of a company in an industry that we have become familiar with. So it's enabling CIMA to test us on actually applying our knowledge in a realistic, common sense, practical way. So what does that mean? It means that when you get asked questions in the exam, and you are going to be asked about conflict or negotiation or value chain, you're going to answer about the benefits or the issues of those or the stages of those in relation to Shinyglas. And you want to make sure that what you're saying fits in with what this company is all about, how it does operate, the nature of the market that it is in. We don't want on exam day to basically say something silly. And to avoid that, we need to become really familiar with the company and its industry so that we don't say something that is just clearly not appropriate. We're applying our knowledge and we're coming out with sensible advice, which really would work with Shinyglas. Okay, so it's giving us that background to enable us to apply our knowledge. But we will get more information on the day and we will be answering the exam questions in relation to both the extra information we get on the day, the information in this precinct. Okay, another reason for going through the precinct and not just going through it with me, but reading it yourself a number of times and thinking about it is to make you confident, to make you feel confident on exam day that actually you do feel like you could work at Shinyglas. You really understand it well enough to be happy to give advice, to decide what you think the best approach to negotiation would be, or how you think Shinyglas should communicate with all of its self-employed salespeople. It's about giving you confidence. You need at the exam day to feel that you actually work at Shinyglas. You understand its structure, you understand the competitors, you understand what it does, how it does it, and then you can answer with confidence and also with appropriate points. Okay, then. Final reason for studying the pre-scene is because it can alert us to the kind of things they could test us on. It makes us think of different scenarios that could happen in the exam. Now, we will be able to think of tens and tens of different things they could test us on when we read the pre-scene. What if Shinyglas does this? They could ask us about this. It opens our mind to the whole range of questions and scenarios that CIMA could present to you in your exam. And it gives us the ability to think about those in advance. Now, we're not necessarily going to be able to anticipate every scenario that CIMA could ask us. That's impossible. But if we can open our minds to the possible things that they could ask us on exam day, and if we've thought about those in advance, won't we feel more confident when we are in the exam? So it's about enabling us to think more broadly about how can they now test us on the E2, F2, and B2 knowledge that we've got in the context of Shinyglas. Okay, so that's the reason we study, or those are the reasons that we study the pre-scene. Really important. So we'll kick it off now. We'll get on with it. We'll do first half today, second half Monday evening, if you're with me. But can I encourage you all, whether you're with me again on Monday or you're not, to also read it through yourself, to think about it yourself, to come up with your own ideas about what might be presented in the exam, what could happen to Shinyglas, and how could they test you on your underpinning knowledge from E2, P2, and F2. All right, then. So let's go through and start reading through the pre-scene. Just to alert you, first of all, to this little context statement. Hope you can see this on screen. This is just pointing out to us that Shinyglas is set in a fictitious world. And it's a world which does not have the specific current issues that our real world has. So, for example, we know that 3-4 years ago, the world was hit by COVID. That is not something that we would be considering in relation to Shinyglas. The context statement says Ignore any of those current and big ongoing global issues. So ignore anything to do with wars, to do with the impact of COVID 3-4 years ago. Ignore those big events, because Shinyglas, whilst it is based in an industry that CIMA are describing accurately, it is not based on the real world. And we don't have to take into account those real world global issues. But it also points out that if you do make reference to issues in this industry that are real, then obviously that will be taken account of in your answer. And it may be that it's a really valid point, and it may add to your argument, and it might therefore be helpful in you earning good marks. So knowledge of this industry, the real industry, is really to help support your arguments. We are not being tested on the double glazing industry. We're being tested on, can you apply E2P2 and F2 principles in real life, in an industry that CIMA have presented to you. But it's about the application of your knowledge. It's not about, are we experts in the double glazing industry, which is good, because I'm not sure any of us are experts in the double glazing industry. All right, then, let's get going. So, first of all, here we go. I'm on the first page of after the contents page, so page number 2 of the pre-scene. And you can see what we've done. We've been working really hard for you. We've got various annotations and highlights going on our copy of the pre-scene. Now, this will be uploaded. So this recording, I'm currently recording this, will be uploaded to YouTube. It will be available to everybody. And also this annotated pre-scene will also be uploaded so that you will be able to see this as well. Okay, so we've been working really hard. We've got loads of annotations. I'm also going to be adding in other things that I'll mention as we go along. All right then, so introduction. So Shinyglas, what does it actually do? So it manufactures double glazed windows and doors for installation into domestic, so housing, and business, so offices, or other types of businesses. So I'm starting to think, when I see businesses, not just offices and in putting windows in trees, I'm thinking about hospitals, I'm thinking about airports, I'm thinking about any type of business property where they have windows, doors, and where there might be a need perhaps for double glazed ones, or even more specific aluminium or safety glass. That's the market that Shinyglas is in. So domestic houses and also business commercial properties. Now, that's an important point, actually, because it should immediately make us realize that Shinyglas does deal in 2 different segments of the market, domestic and business properties. And it should make us think, what are the differences in those 2 aspects of this industry? What are the cost drivers there? What would pricing be like for pricing to householders, domestic market, and pricing to businesses? Does Shinyglas have 2 divisions for this? If it doesn't, might divisionalizing be a good idea? Might that be a way of managing performance? So before I've even read the first sentence, it's giving me ideas. And when you read this, that's what you need to do. You need to think about, so what might that mean for Shinyglas? How might it be structured? What would be the issues? Okay, then. Now, it's the largest fabricator of windows and doors in its home country of Templand. Now, first of all, what else does that say to me? It says, I don't think that Shinyglas operates overseas, outside of its home country of Templand. I think it is very much a domestic player, but it is the largest. So being the largest, I'm now thinking, great, they have big bargaining power. They should be able to buy the supplies they need from suppliers at a decent price. They should have economies of scale. If they're the largest, then presumably over the course of the years that they've developed to be the largest, they've arranged their operations to be highly efficient. We would expect this, wouldn't we? If it's the largest player, it's developed over years, and it should be efficient. That makes me think about the value chain. So the value chain covered at managerial level, if we were to think about that for Shinyglas, I think as we go through the pre-scene, we realize there are lots of different activities here that Shinyglas does, and it has purchases from suppliers, and it supplies to intermediaries. It's got quite a strong value chain, and we could think about how it organizes its activities to actually create value there, to be able to deliver things to the customer that really set it apart from its competitors. Now, because it is based in Templand, and the Templand currency there is Templand dollars, F2 springs to mind. And we've got a little annotation there on the left. What about foreign currency translation? Foreign currency transactions. So in F2, we learned about how to translate transactions, perhaps where Shinyglas is purchasing, perhaps from overseas. Then it might have to translate those purchases into Templand dollars. Then it might also have payables at the year end, which would also have to be retranslated. So I can see that there's a route here for CIMA testing us on our knowledge from F2 of translation of foreign currencies. Now, it also points out, which it always does in every pre-scene, that our company follows IFRSs. So that means everything that we've learnt in F2, International Financial Reporting Standards, will apply. So if we see that Shinyglas might be developing an intangible asset, then IAS 36 would apply. 38, actually. IAS 38 would apply. If we can see that there is some kind of claim against Shinyglas for faulty windows, we can see that IAS 37 would apply, the need for a provision, perhaps. Okay, then. Now, we are the financial manager at Shinyglas's head office. We always are the financial manager in an MCS case. What does that mean? So that means we are not making strategy. We are not going to be asked to determine Shinyglas's strategy, but what we will be asked to do is we will be asked to contribute to the implementation of strategy. How could they source funding for this new strategy? For example, debt or equity. Could they lease assets for their factory, or should they buy them? We have got a focus on the implementation of strategies which will be given to us in the exam. So they've decided to do this, and we're going to help in determining the implementation of that and in monitoring the implementation of that. So, for example, what KPIs could we use? What about the balanced scorecard? We have a medium-term focus, not a long-term focus, but a medium-term focus. We do think about sources of funding. So F2 went through benefits and disadvantages of different sources of funding. We get tested on that regularly in case study. We have to evaluate risks. We are given the strategy that Shinyglas is considering, and we might be asked about the types of risks that this could present. So we have to be all over things like reputational risk and product risk, production risk. Okay, we do have to be able to explain F2 accounting rules relevant to the scenario. And can I tell you now something the examiner says after every exam sitting, which is that students are weakest at the F2 requirements in the exam. Specifically, students are not able to clearly explain and write down the accounting rules for a specific accounting standard, and they're not able to apply it to the information they are given. So it heads up straight away here. At the start of your studies, go back through F2 knowledge, make sure that you don't just understand it, which is what you needed to be able to pass the underpinning F2 exam or to get through your FLP studies. What you need to be able to do now is write down those rules and explain them and apply them. So heads up, go back through your F2 knowledge and make sure you know it well enough to be able to actually explain it to someone else. In fact, try explaining it to someone else. Can you explain when you would create a provision? Can you explain how you would calculate that provision? Can you explain how you would then do the debits and credits for that provision? If you can explain that, we are good. Okay, then. So we're the financial manager then. Those are our responsibilities, and we report to the senior financial manager, Martin, who reports to the FD. That is the typical scenario in an exam, that we are the finance manager and we do report to the senior financial manager. And in the exam, the senior financial manager will no doubt arrive at our desk one morning and give us some information about something that's happened, and they'll ask us, could we now evaluate something or provide some advice about something. All right, then, let's look at what Shinyglas does. So moving on, full glazing. Okay. Now, this first paragraph explains about windows traditionally, in the old days, if you like. So in the old days, windows were single panes of glass, and they were usually in wooden frames. And if we were to go back in the UK, let's say to the 1970s. I know that's a long way back, but if we did, we would find houses and commercial premises, office blocks, etc., with single panes of glass windows set in wooden frames. Easy to install, easy to repair, but really poor at preventing heat loss. And also wooden frames, particularly bad at being long lasting. Wooden frames can rot. Now, what has happened across the world in developed countries, certainly in the UK, is that those windows have been replaced over time, over this period, for double glazed windows, which are much better at preventing heat loss. And in today's world, where we are now far more focused on the environment, on preserving resources, on alternative forms of energy production, and minimizing energy loss, that whole change to double glazing has been very much a driver as what has happened in this industry. Now, traditionally then, single glazed windows. The heat is conducted through the window, the glass, straight through it, and cold air would come in through the outside of the wooden frame. So they really did leak a lot of warmth, and they brought in a lot of cold air. 70% of the heat inside a house could go out through those windows. Now, that is already telling us, I think, that Shinyglas is in the double glazing industry, and the key element of quality of the double glazed windows is going to be the ability to reduce that heat loss. It's a key element of what Shinyglas is producing to minimize loss of energy, to satisfy sustainability requirements. It's going to be a key part of the quality of that window. So, what about the possibility of some of Shinyglas's windows not actually retaining the heat as much as they say they do? This could be a cause for issues when we get to the exam. Customers complaining that whilst they should be keeping in 90% of the heat within the house, they're not actually doing that. It's also in this paragraph then is pointing out that single glazed windows, these are things of the past. They're a redundant technology, not what is actually sold anymore, all replaced by double glazed windows. Now, when we get to look at the growth of Shinyglas, what we see is that they started in the era of single glazed wooden frame windows, and they grew significantly to be the biggest player in Templand. But we ought to realise here, I think, that a key driver of that would have been the driver to replace single glazed windows. But let's think about that logically. Today, how many single glazed windows remain in housing across the country? Now, in Templand, it might be that all of those single glazed windows pretty much have been replaced by double glaze. How does Shinyglas continue to grow? Once you've replaced your single glazed windows with double glazed, how often would a householder replace the double glazed windows? We can see that that is not going to happen very often. And the rapid growth that Shinyglas has had since it started was probably due to the change in this industry. I'd like to know, at the moment in Templand, what percentage of their sales are through replacing single glazed wooden windows and doors compared to other aspects of their income through selling perhaps to new house builders who are constructing new houses, or are perhaps selling specialist types of windows with specific safety requirements. But the growth of Shinyglas surely was driven by the change in this market, the driver to have a better window that retained the heat. As a little note, and we'll cover more about this tomorrow when we look at the industry, the UK is the worst in Western Europe for actually having buildings with windows that retain the heat. Other countries in mainland Europe, in Western Europe, are far more advanced than the UK, and makes me wonder about Templand and also about different regions within Templand. It might be that there are certain areas where there is more focus on replacement of windows and doors, and it might be that there are other areas of the country where that's all been done, and we might be looking now at other sources of income streams for our windows. Okay. Now, it points out underneath that lovely picture of a blue guttered window and blue window frames that double glazed windows have two panes of glass, seal space between them, and it's that space that stops the heat from escaping. And it points out here, and we've highlighted, is that that space can be filled with either air or an inert gas such as argon. We don't know at the moment what proportion of Shinyglas is windows are filled with air or argon. We don't know if there's a cost differential to that. We don't know if Shinyglas therefore prices those windows differently. And we don't know what the performance of those two different fillers, if you like, actually is in terms of heat loss. So, something that we ought to bear in mind in terms of pricing of windows and also the costing of windows. Now, if Shinyglas has grown dramatically over the years because of the nature of the industry changing, but if it has predominantly changed by now, and single glazed windows have pretty much all been replaced, we do have to think, don't we, about the cost base of Shinyglas. We might be in quite a mature industry now. And therefore, efficiency, cost basis, really, really important. And therefore, this little point is just a point to consider. Which of these predominantly is Shinyglas using? What are the costs of those? Is it worth that? Should they be considering moving to the other type of filler? Okay, then. Points out here that a typical double glazed house will lose 10 to 15% of its heat through its windows. And the marketing of double glazing is on the basis that it will retain heat within buildings. Therefore, the benefits, of course, reducing cost to the owner of the building, reducing carbon emissions, Again, something that particularly commercial building owners will be acutely aware of, reducing their own carbon footprint. So replacing their windows with energy efficient ones that drive us for sustainability, encouraging commercial buildings particularly, and owners of those commercial buildings to replace those windows. But my thought about this was Shinyglas is probably, as it says here, marketing its double glazed windows on the basis of a certain level of heat retention. And then again, that makes me think of, well, what if then the customers find that actually that is not what these windows are actually doing? It's not reducing their heating bills as much as Shinyglas says they will. Might we find in the exam that there are dissatisfied customers? Might we be asked how we would communicate with them, how we would manage the conflict? Okay, then. Now, it also points out that double glazing is also a sound barrier against street noise. And it's far better at reducing street noise than single glazing. Now, that makes me think again then, okay, of the different drivers for the reason why people purchase these windows. So they purchase them because they want to reduce heat loss in the building. They want to be more sustainable. They also purchase them because of their soundproofing ability. And that might make me think of specific types of buildings that would need to be soundproofed. So perhaps I'm thinking of hotels that are based in city centres, where they need really good soundproofing of those windows that are facing onto really busy roads. And I might think about some of those hotel companies who have lots of buildings in lots of cities and the potential that that offers to Shinyglas for big contracts with large hotel companies to replace those windows with ones that are even better at soundproofing. Now, something that it does not mention in our pre-scene, but what that does exist in the real world, so we ought to bear in mind, is triple glazing. It talks about Shinyglas, and Shinyglas offers double glazed windows, but in reality, there is now triple glazing. Triple glazing has much higher credentials for retaining heat. It also has much better credentials for being a barrier to sound. So, is there a potential for product development by Shinyglas to start offering windows with triple glazing? How would they price that? How would they set up a project to investigate whether or not it's worth offering triple glazed windows? How would they source the triple glazed sealed units? How would they negotiate with a supplier? How would they ensure quality of those triple glazed sealed units? So just a thought about the different drivers really here for different customer types buying double glazed windows, and a thought about what about product development into triple glazed ones. Now, it also points out in this last paragraph that another use of double glazed windows, and indeed triple glazed windows, would be safety and security, far better than single glazing. Makes it much harder for someone wanting to break in through the window to be able to do that. Again, this makes me think, would we find out on exam day that Shinyglas has been marketing its windows on the base of it being unable to be smashed, and some customers are complaining because they have had windows smashed and they have been subject to burglaries? So might there be some conflict here? Might we have to look at why those windows failed? And is it something to do with the supplier? Might we be looking at the quality of the sealed units that we are getting from our suppliers? So we've just pointed out here at the bottom, windows actually aren't as boring as we thought. manufacturers can differentiate them based on all of these different properties. And knowing which customers want the windows for different reasons should enable Shinyglas to offer the customer exactly what they want. But I think that also means there's a lot of skill here. Staff or salespeople need to be well trained to offer the customer exactly what it is they need from a window, to know which products it is that will suit them better. So the requirements for training become important. The requires for maintaining knowledge become important, for communication to all of the staff or third parties who are actually communicating with customers and telling them which windows would be advisable for them to buy. Finally, on this page, just a little thought here about the Integrated Reporting Council and the 6 capitals within integrated reporting. And just thinking there about how does this whole idea of sustainability and the driver to reduce heat loss and to replace windows with glazed ones, how does that fit in to how Shinyglas might report its activities using the 6 capitals of the integrated report? Now, that's something that we cover in F2, and it is something that is regularly tested. Final thought on the right here, we can see that windows might be being sold on the basis of the customer, the homeowner, will then save on their energy bills. Might we be asked in the exam to actually discuss a cost-benefit analysis that we have done to show the customer the benefits of double glazed windows? Now, in a case study, you aren't going to be asked to produce a big calculation. But what you could be presented with is that calculation, is that cost-benefit analysis, and you could be asked to critique it. So talk about potentially where there might be benefits that you might say are very subjective, or where there potentially could be costs that are being omitted here. So you're not going to have to produce that, but you could well have to critique one. Shinyglas has done for the customer cost-benefit analysis of the benefits of replacing their customers' windows with the new fabulous Shinyglas windows. Perhaps we ought to critique that because perhaps customers are saying, well, we're not getting the benefit that you are telling us. Okay, then. Now we've got a lovely picture, haven't we, on the top of the next page of a window. How interesting can it be? Well, if we look at that picture for a moment, it is important for us to understand what Shinyglas is actually doing. Because when we read the whole of the pre-scene, what we appreciate is that Shinyglas actually is a very specific element of the whole of the supply chain of double glazed windows. If we look at the whole of that supply chain, what does Shinyglas actually do? Well, the glass that we can see in this diagram, that glass, we can see it's double glazed. That glass is bought in by Shinyglas from a supplier who manufactures the 2 layers of glass with the air or argon inside, sealed at the edges. That is what they buy. They then, Shinyglas, within their factory, buy in this case, we can see a UPVC framing material. So they buy in long lengths of this UPVC framing material, and then they in their factory create the frame to the customer's specification, and they insert that glass sealed unit within it. So we really have got a manufacturing company here. And actually, that is quite a contrast to the last couple of pre-scenes. The last couple of pre-scenes we've had have been in the service industry or the retail industry. We've definitely got a manufacturer here But they're not manufacturing every single element of this window or door. They are buying in significant elements. So when we think about the quality of this finalized window, that is not only down to Shinyglas, because the sealed unit they buy from a third party. Now that makes me think of quality management issues for Shinyglas. Indeed, it even makes me think of total quality management. How does Shinyglas know it is obtaining quality sealed units? How does it know it's obtaining the best quality framing material? And if there's a problem with a window that's in a customer's home, whose fault is it? There could easily be conflict here because there could be arguments between Shinyglas, the suppliers of these various elements that they buy from. Is the quality issue with them? And indeed, when we read on in the pre-scene, we discover that Shinyglas does not itself install the windows. It relies on independent installing companies. Now, could a problem be with the window being installed incorrectly? So when I said there's clearly a supply chain here, there is, and Shinyglas fits into the middle of it. But the customer obviously ends up with the results of the quality of all of the elements of that supply chain. The quality of installers, the quality of the design and the manufacturing of the window or door by Shinyglas, the quality of the sealed units that are bought in, the quality of the frame, and there's also other things, other raw materials that Shinyglas has to buy in, like window hinges, for example. And the quality of all those are of a concern. Now, also, the cost of all those are a concern. And if we think about the cost base of Shinyglas and potentially about this industry now being more mature, so the need to keep our production efficient and economical, we need to consider the costs of all of these elements, and we need to think about the drivers of all of these costs. So I'm also now thinking about activity-based costing as a technique as well. Okay, then. It then shows us in very clear fashion how these glass units work. So pointing out that these glass units are sealed. So what Shinyglas buys is 2 pieces of glass sealed together with spacer bars around the edges, filled with air or argon, as we know. And that seal is incredibly important. But that is down to the supplier. So it could be that Shinyglas starts to have problems with one of its suppliers. And we need to investigate and communicate and resolve a conflict. And we might need to make a provision for claims from customers. And anything to do with seal issues might well be down to that supplier. Now, it points out there on the right, per F2, of course, that we might need to make a provision if when we sell our windows, we provide a warranty with that window. Provision for a warranty claim. And the details then about when must you make a provision. So we need to remember those rules per IS 37. If there really is an obligation to make good a problem with a window at the reporting date, and it is probable that Shinyglas is going to have to pay out and make that repair, and that cost can be reliably estimated, then Shinyglas would need to make a provision. We have been tested in many pre-scenes in the past about how to account for a provision that the company might need to make. Now, points out then also what I've already been saying, E2 now, conflict resolution. If there is a problem with a window once it's in a customer's house, who is at fault? Is it the supplier? Is it Shinyglas? Is it the installer? Who exactly is at fault? And how do we determine that? Now, that's made me think of another issue, regularly tested, not so much an issue, but another aspect of knowledge, regularly tested, which is what kind of information systems does Shinyglas have? Because I think it should have some very good management information systems, such that when there are any issues with Windows, that the findings of what was at fault is clearly recorded, so that Shinyglas has the ability to look at data and understand what are the sources of quality issues. What are the drivers of those types of repair costs that they are then perhaps incurring if they go and fix the window? So good management information systems, good data analytics systems, analyzing the source of customer complaints, the source of window malfunctions, to understand those drivers of those costs, to enable renegotiation with suppliers, to enable project teams to be established to source new suppliers. All of those areas, projects, negotiations, quality management, all of those at management level that we know about and could be asked to talk about. Final point there is a good one. We talk about risk. And we talk in P2 about different types of risk. I'm hoping that you're going, wow, Louise, there are lots of issues here which present risks to Shinyglas. Their reliance on all of these suppliers and the quality of these suppliers. And we can see that reputational risk is a big risk. Now, we know that Shinyglas is the largest fabricator of doors and windows in Templand. But we know from later on in the pre-scene, there are others, and actually, there are many, many others. It is actually quite a fragmented industry. There are some big players like Shinyglas, but there are also very large numbers of smaller ones. And many customers will go to the smaller suppliers of windows and doors. So reputational risk is a big risk for Shinyglas. There are many, many competitors that customers could go to get their doors and windows. Anything that presents reputational risk, we, Shinyglas management, would need to be addressing. So risk management. Okay, then. Points out in this last little paragraph here, mainly that we've already said, which is that these seals in these sealed units can break. Those seals could break because of poor quality from the supplier of these sealed units. And when they fail, that can cause problems with condensation within the windows. And they can fail because of faulty manufacturing from the supplier in the first place, or because of temperature change over time. Now, elsewhere in the pre-scene, it points out that in Templand, they have very different weathers. They have areas that are much warmer, and they have areas of the country that are much colder. And that makes me realize that actually condensation issues could occur because of temperature changes. So again, if there's a fault in the window, is that because of faulty installation? Is it because of faulty suppliers manufacturing? Or is it actually because of naturally arising temperature changes? Even with double glazed windows, there is the possibility of condensation on the window, not within the window in that space between the glass, but on the window, on the outside or inside, just because of temperature changes. So we might have conflict with customers. They are saying this window's failed. We are saying, no, it hasn't. It's because of temperature change that has naturally caused some condensation on the outside or the inside. So that's just reminding me about conflict. Also, what this final sentence makes me think of is that failures in windows might not occur until years after installation. Could we find in the exam that suddenly Shinyglas has a problem with some windows that were installed 6 or 7 years ago, where there might have been issues with the supply of those sealed units from a supplier all those years ago? How would Shinyglas deal with that? Would they be able to negotiate a solution with the supplier all those years on? Would they need to make warranty provisions? And how would they deal with the communication, perhaps, to other customers who have those types of windows installed, but who have not yet reported an issue, but we can see that there will be an issue with them? So communication to the customer of potential problems. That has also been tested in many pre-scenes in the past. Okay, so we've got a very large picture here of a window with condensation. And we've just sort of pulled together on the right a little list here of things we've already kind of come across, but it focuses on a bit more on this page, which is there's lots of different types of windows that people want for different reasons. Standard glass, toughened glass, safety glass, frosted glass, soundproof glass. There's all types of reasons, drivers for purchasing of windows. And this page under that diagram is just pointing out a little bit more about some of those different reasons and different characteristics of these windows. Now, it points out that most of the windows, the glass, is manufactured using this float glass method. And what happens is molten glass, so liquid glass, is floated on a bed of molten metal. And what that should be doing is producing good quality glass that is uniform in flatness and in thickness. So that made me think, of course, of yes, the window should have no problems when you look through it of distortion. If I look through a window, I should be able to see through it as if I was looking just through an open space. There should be no distortion. But this process, if it goes wrong with some of our suppliers, we could be receiving sealed units that actually have distortion. And it might be that we don't spot that on receipt of the sealed unit, and that might end up going to the customer. So that makes me think of the costs of quality. What kind of quality processes does Shinyglas have? Does it have strong quality control on receipt of these units? Does it have a culture of total quality management? But I'm thinking that there are many, many potential issues now with the units that are received by Shinyglas from suppliers, potential issues, and the need for really good quality processes is going to be paramount. Now, we learn later on that Shinyglas is not a sell in high volume, sell it cheap type of operator. Its business model is about differentiating itself, giving the customer high quality windows, what they actually need. So finding out whether they need safety glass or security glass or opaque glass or a certain level of reduction of heat loss, making sure that what they sell the customer is absolutely what they need. So Shinyglas is providing high quality, and also in this pre-scene, it points out that they're selling at therefore a relatively high price. Shinyglas is at the higher end of the market, differentiating its product, providing quality, but at a higher price. So quality control is going to be absolutely fundamental. Now, on this page, it talks about these different characteristics that the glass can be manufactured to have. So there's toughened glass for security and for safety. If it breaks into tiny little granules. If you have a car, you will know that your car is made out of your car windscreen is made out of toughened glass. If it's hit by a stone, it doesn't break into large, big, sharp pieces. It shatters into tiny granules that don't have sharp edges, which therefore would not cause injury. So toughened glass is about safety, and also It's about security, less easy to break. A non-toughened glass. Now, laminated glass is another variation again. So this is where we've got our 2 layers of glass, and we have it between them a layer of resin. So that makes this type of double glazed unit incredibly stronger. So security wise, much harder to break. And again, safety wise, if it is broken, the glass actually stays stuck together because of the resin. So again, very good for safety. Now, this makes me then focus on which type of glass do customers need, what suits their actual purpose, what type of building is this going in, or is this even potentially glass that's not going into a building? Within this industry, if we thought about how people within this industry and the suppliers could actually seek new sources of income, then glass within CIS, within transport options, there is glass in all kinds of different transport options like aeroplanes, buses, etc. And it's possible, isn't it, that a sealed double glazed unit could be put into a bus or a train. But the safety requirements would be different. And this just makes me think about all of Shinyglas's customers, what exactly they need, and how well trained the sales team must be to know about the products, to be able to sell the right product, and also how good Shinyglas must be at sourcing the right product from its suppliers. Now, at the bottom, it talks about frosted glass, and this is all about privacy. So if we wanted to put glass perhaps in spaces like bathrooms in houses, or even perhaps in office buildings where they want to have some privacy, they want a lot of glass between offices, but they'd like some privacy, then frosted glass would be another type, which is where the glass is opaque, you can't actually see through it, and it blurs some images. Now, on the right here, just another little thought, again, about reputational risk. What if we are selling a window that should meet the needs of the customer in terms of toughness or safety, and it fails, and the reputational harm that that could cause? And also then thinking about the need for, again, provisions if we end up not actually delivering what the customer has asked us, and they then start to claim compensation, particularly for safety risks. If actually the glass has caused an injury. Now think of the reputational damage of that. So lots of risk here, P2, I think, for Shinyglas. Okay, then. Points out at the top of the page this final potential sort of thought about the different varieties of uses of glass, which is for soundproofing. So again, just pointing out there that recording studios might need soundproof windows. And I said, didn't I? Also hotel chains. Now, Shinyglas does sell windows and doors to the building trade. And that is a completely different income stream, if you think about it, to selling doors and windows to individual homeowners. So where a homeowner might want to replace 8 windows with new double glazed safety glass, let's say, of course, a construction company might be building 400 houses on one site, and they need 8 windows for each house. You know, we are talking here about big contracts. And with hotels, if they are wanting to change their windows to soundproof windows, again, we are talking here about big contracts. So this idea of soundproof windows just made me think of the commercial opportunities for Shinyglas selling bulk soundproofed windows to someone like a hotel chain that is changing all of its windows within the hotels that it has to make them better soundproofed. The big contract, how would that be organized operationally in the factory? How would that big contract be negotiated? Again, both of those thinking about P2, the factory and how it be organized. And actually, if Shinyglas wins a contract with a big hotel chain to replace all the windows for soundproof ones, would they need another factory? We know through reading the pre-scene that Shinyglas has one factory in Templand. And the sources of revenue, the revenue streams it has from building contractors putting large orders through with Shinyglas for hundreds and hundreds of windows at a time, the potential for a hotel chain doing the same, compared to the householder ordering 6 or 7 windows at a time. I'm just thinking about how do they manage the capacity of that one factory? Might they need to look into another factory? And when we get to that idea, then I'm thinking sources of finance, F2. Leasing a factory rather than buying and owning one or building and owning one. Leases, F2. I'm thinking about a project to evaluate the need for a second factory. Project management, putting together an appropriate project team. So I know that on this page, it doesn't mention anything about that. But when we're reading the pre-scene, we need to be thinking about the wider impacts of what we're reading in terms of P2, E2, and F2. Okay, then. Points out in the left-hand side that because when we receive our sealed glass units from our suppliers, we then put a frame around that, and then the installer then goes and installs the window. It might be that it's difficult for us to see whether a problem with that window subsequently is due to the sealed glass failing, because the frame is hiding those spaces and the joins between those glass panels in the sealed unit. So it might make claims from customers difficult to resolve in terms of what has actually caused the problem. Now, it points out in this little section next to this window, excuse me, just have to blow my nose. Apologies, folks, for my cold. That windows are designed to fit the space and to fit the function that is required. The cheapest designs are a single sealed unit that has no opening parts. So the cheapest thing that a customer could order would be one big window that does not open. But more complicated designs that might suit the customer would have sections that open, hinged, to allow for ventilation. Now, if we think about those types of windows, in a house, you might be able to open those sections of window and open them as far as you like. But in buildings like office blocks, hotels, there's usually a restriction on how wide those windows can open so that people can't fall out. So that construction of that window and making sure that it meets the needs of the customer and it meets the spec of what the customer said they want is very important. It might be that a window is also a fire exit. And now we start thinking about law, regulations in Templand, and about providing windows that meet regulations, for example, as a way of exiting a building. Or in a higher floor of a building, the windows being compliant with not opening too far so that people can't fall out. This actually makes me think about the risks of breaching windows regulations and laws and the risks that that presents to Shinyglas, particularly reputational, but also sensational and being fined. Okay, then. Now, on the right there, we've just pointed out that clearly then, when Shinyglas sells its windows, it does sell a range of different types of windows. Ones that do open, don't open, etc. So there's cheaper ones, mid-range ones, there's more expensive ones. And that presents problems for pricing. It also presents, I think, a need for good analysis of contribution that each of these window types makes. So a good bit of data on costs, selling prices, which of these products is actually generating the most contribution is something that if I was at Shinyglas, would really want to be knowing. Quite clearly, some of these windows that need toughened glass, safety glass, that need certain hinges and certain openings, they're going to cost a lot more than the basic window without any openings. And how much do we sell them for? And what is the contribution? And it might be that Shinyglas would be better restricting some of the range that it sells, because some of those might be making minimal contribution. Now, the next bit had me slightly alarmed. The sealed units that Shinyglas actually buys are supplied by only 3 specialist manufacturers. They're all based in Templand. Now, if we just think about that, any other fabricator of windows and doors, like Shinyglas, is buying the sealed units from these suppliers. So there are only 3 within Templand. Now, that just made me nervous. So it made me nervous for a number of ways. First of all, how does Shinyglas negotiate to make sure that it was prioritised by these manufacturers if Shinyglas suddenly gets a large order, say from a construction company or a chain of hotels? How does it negotiate to ensure that its orders are prioritized by one of these manufacturers, because there are only 3? What happens if these manufacturers that Shinyglas is using does not actually have the capacity to provide the windows that Shinyglas needs for a big order that's just come in? And that makes me think of the possibility of Shinyglas needing to source new manufacturers outside of Templand. The pros and cons of that. The costs of bringing in the sealed units, so the delivery of those, but also the cost of buying them. And it might be, we don't know the exact economy of Templand, but it might be that the manufacturing costs within Templand are quite high. It might have quite high staff costs in the economy. There might be high other overhead costs in Templand. So it might be that sourcing from these 3 specialist manufacturers actually is quite costly for Shinyglas. But obviously delivery costs are lower because they're located in the same country. But what if Shinyglas has to look elsewhere for its sealed glass? What are the risks of that? What are the cost implications of that? How would we negotiate with an overseas supplier? I could easily see a whole exam with lots of different requirements based on that proposition, that they are looking to source the sealed units from another supplier because these 3 are at capacity, or there are quality issues perhaps with 1 or 2 of these 3. Now, when it also says that there are only 3 specialist manufacturers here based in Templand, that also makes me think of the level of competition that Shinyglas has with its competitors to source the sealed units. So having good relationships with these suppliers is going to be paramount. E2, relationship management, absolutely paramount. Because, as I said, Shinyglas wants to be able to rely on supply from these sealed glass unit suppliers within Templand, or find another. Now, another good point on the left here, where it says P2, is about that value creation and the sort of value chain, because clearly any supplier, fabricator of windows and doors is buying the same sealed units, because there are only these 3 specialist manufacturers of the sealed units. So the sealed units are standard. We, Shinyglas, are not doing anything with the actual glass unit that is different from any of our competitors. So where do we create our value that enables us to be the major supplier in Templand of doors and windows? What do we do that adds the value? value chain, value creation, business models, E2, really important. And we'll see later on that and we've got provided the business model of Shinyglas. Really important that, because we might in the exam have to consider whether some new move by Shinyglas actually fits with the business model. Okay, then. Now it points out that frames in which we put the sealed units are made from different materials. Now, clearly, these are going to have different performance levels. They're going to have different costs. They're going to potentially have more or less demands. And this also makes the costing, really, of the business more difficult because they're going to be sourcing different types of frames. So, UPVC, plastic. So, in terms of sustainability, what that made me think of is what happens when Shinyglas replaces existing windows? If it replaces existing windows of a UPVC type, what happens to all that plastic in the windows that have been removed? Is there some form of recycling that Shinyglas is doing? Are they not doing anything like that? Might there be a proposal in the exam of some new recycling possibility with a third-party company to recycle the doors and windows that have been removed? And might that be a topic for us in the exam? How would we go about deciding what the best approach would be if there are 2 or 3 presented to us? How would we negotiate with a third-party recycling company? So there's just a possibility here of thinking about the replacement side of this and the sustainability side, particularly where we're looking at UPVC windows that we might be replacing with new UPVC windows. So it's a type of plastic. It can be fitted straight into brickwork. There's no need for a wooden subframe. And it's supplied as a box section, and we can see in this diagram that sort of boxy structure. And then inside it, of course, to give it strength, it's got steel or aluminium. Normally it comes in a white section, but it can be manufactured to look like wood. It's very weather resistant. It doesn't discolor. And therefore, it would be a very sound choice for the customer. Break in the webinar, probably not at the moment. I'll have a break. Well, I'll have my end session where I'll take any questions. Okay, then. Remember, it's all being recorded, though. So if you do need to take a break, you will be able to access the recording up on YouTube. Okay, then. Now, this then makes me think of another possibility, because whilst it says it comes in white, it comes in wood effect. It is possible today that there are companies that actually can spray paint the UPVC into any color that the customer wants. So another thought for me in the exam would be, what if there is a proposal to acquire a company that currently does offer spray painting of UPVC to different colors? Now, this would enable Shinyglas to offer a much wider tailored offering of doors in different colors to customers, window frames in different colors, much more differentiation. And if we think about the acquisition of a company that already does this spraying, we get into F2, acquisitions. We get into the whole concept of subsidiaries and goodwill on acquisition and how to count for subsidiaries. We get into the whole possibility of significant influence. We don't acquire control of this UPVC spraying company, but we obtain enough shares to have significant influence. It would be treated as an associate. So, again, something that the examiner does say we aren't very good at in the exam: consolidations. How to treat a subsidiary that's been acquired in the financial statements, how to treat an associate that's been acquired in the financial statements. And if it's a subsidiary, making sure that we could explain how goodwill is calculated on the acquisition of control of another company. Okay, then. Now, something else that we've put here in yellow under UPVC is when we find out a bit more about the industry, and more about that tomorrow, what we actually find is that most fabricators are very much using UPVC. And there doesn't appear to be any significant R&D going on in terms of what is going to be the next replacement. And that then makes me think about the possibility of what R&D is Shinyglas doing. Are they looking at the possibility of different types of framing material? And that makes me think about research and development F2. It makes me think about setting up a project, managing a project, the stages of a project, to investigate other types of framing. So all lots of different aspects of E2 and F2 in terms of different possibilities here. Now, it also points out that framing can be in aluminium. And we found out that Shinyglas does also offer aluminium frames. These are slightly older fashioned frames because they were often used before UPVC arrived into the market. But they are still used because they are really, really strong. They're very durable. They're very rigid. So in a situation, perhaps more commercial uses, aluminium frames are still used. Now, we've pointed out here that aluminium is more expensive than UPVC. So if Shinyglas is using aluminium frames for some of its customers, which we believe that it is, because it is making windows and doors in both UPVC and aluminium frames for windows, we need to understand the cost of that, and therefore overall the cost base of the aluminium window, and we need to make sure that Shinyglas is actually offering the right window to the right customer and not offering perhaps aluminium ones where actually they aren't needed. So again, product differentiation, we need to think about what actually is suitable for the customer. Now, it points out there is a disadvantage of aluminium, and I could see this being a risk to Shinyglas, which is that if it is fitted directly in contact with brickwork in a building, it can corrode. Now, that could lead to a very significant risk in terms of windows potentially falling out, in terms of the frame actually leaking because it's corroded. So another risk here for Shinyglas, but also we need to think about this in terms of who is responsible for making sure that aluminium frames are fitted correctly, and that would be the installer. Now, when we read on in our pre-scene, what we know is that Shinyglas does not install its own windows. It relies on 40 individual companies. So most of them are quite small. They would have probably 15, 20 people who are installers. But Shinyglas relies on separate companies to install the windows. Now, that then leads to an issue here, which is if the installers install the windows incorrectly in any way, but this example is what if they install aluminium frames without installing them into a wood subframe? That will cause problems. Who is going to be liable? So is that going to be Shinyglas? Is that the installer? And again, we've got this possibility of conflict in terms of determining where the fault lies and determining who is going to rectify it, who is going to pay for that, provisions. So another risk, really, I think, facing Shinyglas. Now, wooden frames we've already talked about in that they were the older way of providing windows and doors. Wooden frames and single glass. However, there is still a market for wooden frames today, particularly in period properties, so older properties, where they are required to maintain that period look. So where the local authorities, the local government, would not allow UPVC window frames or aluminium frames to be used to maintain that period look, they have to use materials of the period, in other words, wood. So what we find out later on is it would appear that Shinyglas is not in the market for providing wooden window frames. But is this a potential scenario in the exam, as we've written down here on the right, for Shinyglas to actually offer a more bespoke wooden frame for those types of period or listed properties? Would it be worth doing? What skills would be needed? What kind of investment appraisal technique would we use to determine if this was a good idea? What kind of new equipment might we need in the factory? What would be the source of our wooden frames? Is it a worthwhile segment? Would this fit with the current business model? How would we price this product? Pricing strategy. If we were to go into these more bespoke wooden frames, would we make that a standalone division, a standalone profit center? So thinking now about P2 responsibility centers, how would we set KPIs for that? And how would we build a team to manage this perhaps more bespoke, listed property, old property type of window replacement? So again, might not be anything in your exam, but it's got the potential to be a proposed strategy to go into this smaller, perhaps niche market of wooden window frames in older properties where wooden window frames are required by regulations. Now, it points out here that if we were going to go into wooden window frames, we would need industrial robots to cut lengths of wood. We would need various adhesives and fasteners. We would nail together wood, which is not how we make UPVC frames. So I'm taking that really to be about this would be quite complex. It would be quite different. We would have to source new suppliers for some of these raw materials. We would have to, in our factory, have different equipment. And now I'm thinking about, okay, would we use a part of our existing factory for that? It depends upon capacity issues. Would we potentially want a new factory for this? What about whether we would lease the equipment or whether we would buy it? Net present values, payback periods, all of these possibilities if we were being proposed in the exam to go into this new niche marketplace. Okay, then. Points out right at the bottom of this page that the sealed units that are used in the double glazed windows and the frames are very heavy. And hinges that are used in these windows to enable them to be opened and used on doors, obviously, to enable them to be opened, have got to be robust. Again, this is something that is the concern of Shinyglas because they are putting together the window or door. So where do they get all of those raw materials? The hinges, the catches, the components that they need to put together the windows, and how do they quality check them to ensure that they are strong enough to withstand the weight of the sealed unit itself and also the weight of the frame. If we were looking at a door hinge has to bear the weight of the window, of the glass in the door and of the frame. And if it's not robust, the whole door will become distorted. over time, and the door won't open properly. So again, more hints about how products could fail when they're with the customer, how quality management is going to be very important for Shinyglas, and how do we manage those risks? And again, this is where I would be thinking data is very important for Shinyglas in terms of quality of all of these components that it's buying, the chance of that failing, quality data in terms of when the customer finds a problem with their product, what is the actual cause? This should be being analysed, understanding the causes of the problems, understanding what is then causing the costs of having to go and fix some of these windows or doors. Okay, then, if we move on to the next page, it's just showing us some of those frames in terms of the way they are provided. This looks like UPVC, could equally, I suppose, be aluminium ones. But I don't think there's anything particular in that photograph that is particularly helpful to us. I think we've seen that before. Points out, though, underneath that, of course, don't forget doors, because we are selling windows, but we're also selling doors. So it talks about here, shops, offices frequently have fully glazed doors. Nice little picture here of a shop in the UK where we can see there a fully glazed door. Metal framed. Clearly, a fully glazed door in a commercial setting needs to be absolutely safe and secure, robust. It needs to be able to defend itself against break-ins. So usually set into metal frames. And for commercial doors, very much we are looking at toughened or laminated glass, those ones that provide that additional safety in case it's smashed and security. Now, that paragraph, the fact that it's saying to us, don't forget the selling of doors as well, makes me think, does Shinyglas have separate divisions? Now, I've already been thinking about, does it have separate divisions for selling windows to houses, householders, individual consumers, from a separate division where it might sell bulk orders of windows to construction companies for their new housing estates? And I'm already thinking those are very different in terms of the nature of the product, much more standardized if it's being bought in bulk by a builder. Pricing would be different. So I'm thinking two different divisions makes a lot of sense. And then we can understand the profitability of each of those. But now, well, now I'm thinking, would we also need a separate division for the doors that we sell? Because again, this is potentially a different market. Potentially we are selling doors into the commercial market, and it is for office blocks and shops. It's a different market. It's got a different structure to it. It's got a different requirement for safety. So if we were having different divisions, and I'm thinking I would do that if I was running this company, then we could start to think about P2 transfer pricing. Because if the factory is manufacturing these, at what price would it then transfer those to those different divisions? Now, we regularly get tested on transfer pricing. The issues of setting an appropriate transfer price to motivate the factory, to motivate the division in terms of its ability to make a profit. How would we determine an appropriate transfer price? Now, also, something that is tested quite regularly is about delegation. So when it comes to managing people, the two aspects, we've sometimes been asked about the benefits of delegating certain decision making. So, of course, if we're thinking about divisions, then we would be thinking perhaps about, is this a profit centre where we would delegate pricing to each of those divisional heads? Would we be treating these centres as cost centres? But in terms of delegation, what do we delegate and what don't we delegate? So in terms of whether the salespeople, when they are negotiating with customers, in terms of what they are allowed to agree with the customer without seeking senior approval, could we delegate more to the people who are actually discussing with customers and selling the products? Now, I know from later on that all of the third-party self-employed sales teams have to go back to the regional sales managers employed by Shinyglas to get approval for any deal. And I'm thinking that delegation might be something that could easily come up in the exam. So delegating in terms of our salespeople, allowing them to actually make deals without having to resort back to getting approval, but also delegation in terms of setting up divisions, delegating decision-making, delegating pricing, all possibilities where we would have to discuss the pros and cons of that particular delegation situation. Okay, then. If we just move on to the next page, it's then showing us a typical residential house in the UK. And it's pointed out that in the domestic market, usually for the domestic market, frames are made out of UPVC or wood. And, the main purpose here is about light. There's less perhaps requirement for the thought about resin bonded units for that added security. There's less perhaps about the need for aluminium frames, but there certainly is the need for reducing heat loss. Now, we've just pointed out on the right here something that I mentioned earlier, which is nowhere in this pre-scene does it actually mention triple glazing. But this is a growing trend in the real world. So points out here that in Scandinavia, 60% of the sales of windows is actually triple glazed. Now, that's in Scandinavia where the temperatures are lower than in the UK, but we don't know anything about Templand. We do know that some areas are warmer than others, and it might be that there is going to be this demand for triple glazed windows in Templand. So we would think about, would this be an opportunity? But how would we set prices? Now, triple glazing literally means 3 layers of glass. So we can imagine the increased cost of the sealed unit. We could appreciate the need for very robust frames and different frames that are wider to accommodate the triple glazed glass. So the cost of this is going to be significantly higher. We've got there the statistic that triple glazing costs 10 to 20% more than double glazing. So pricing these products would also be important. Would we be able to recoup our profit margin that we are currently getting on double glazed units by selling triple glazed units in Templand and setting an appropriate price? Would the Templand market actually be willing to pay that price? Now, it also says that if we're looking at sustainability and environmental impact, then triple glazing is 50 to 60% more efficient than double glazing. It retains the heat that much better. So customers might be able to recoup this cost a lot quicker, perhaps, through the saving on their heating bills. Now, we might be asked, therefore, to assess the feasibility of this triple glazed product. So we might be able to consider or think about the pros and cons of using net present values, accounting rate returns, payback, all of these possible investment evaluation techniques, which we might have to discuss the pros and cons of them in relation to a specific scenario like this. we might be asked to think about how we would cost up this product. So activity-based costing and activity-based management from P2, the concept of that, and how would we apply it in terms of us producing triple glazed units? Or how would target costing actually apply if we were thinking about the potential pricing of a new triple glazed unit? So again, triple glazing, not something mentioned in the pre-scene, something we know from the real world, and something therefore that just presents opportunities for CIMA to set a scenario that tests us on our managerial level knowledge, but in the context of that opportunity, perhaps for Shinyglas. Okay, now let's make sure we really do understand this industry. So we need to make sure that we understand where in this industry does Shinyglas fit. So Shinyglas is a window and door fabricator. That is what Shinyglas does. It points out here that there are several large companies who manufacture windows and doors, and that is what Shinyglas does. They manufacture the windows and doors for householders, residential customers, and for commercial customers. So building construction companies, potentially owners of office buildings, owners of hotel chains, etc. The largest of these are nationwide. They have national identities. Now, we know that Shinyglas is the largest one in Templand. Important, though, I think, that that's good. So, yes, Shinyglas has got a national brand. It's got national appeal. It sells across the whole of Templand. And it has got some other competitors who are also relatively large, but not as large as Shinyglas. But that also makes me think there's something that's not said there, which is none of these windows and doors fabricators in Templand are international, are global. So this is very much a domestic market competing with domestic players. But then that makes me think of the possibility in the exam of Shinyglas being faced with a new competitor, one from overseas, perhaps from the country next to Templand, where there's suddenly a new competitor that's offering a different pricing structure, that has a different method of marketing. And this could put together a whole range of requirements in the exam as to how Shinyglas might respond and how we would evaluate that, how we would set up a project to manage that, how we would communicate our message to the customer. Lots and lots of possibilities if the industry suddenly saw the arrival of a new global player. Now, it also presents the opposite opportunity, perhaps, which is that Shinyglas might decide to start selling its windows and doors overseas. Now, if in Templand we were to find that the market actually has slowed down in recent years because wooden windows have all been replaced, mainly. So now it's not about replacing all those wooden doors, it's about individual householders wanting better energy efficiency or nicer looking windows. It's about the commercial customers, particularly the construction industry, who might be building more houses in Templand. It might be that if in Templand, actually the market has slowed down recently, there might be a driver here for the possibility of Shinyglas moving to sell its windows and doors in the neighbouring country. And that type of scenario has presented itself in previous exams. And then, of course, that opens up lots of opportunities for acquiring another company, acquisitions, evaluating that other company, negotiating a sales price, negotiations. So lots of possibilities there, which at the moment, Shinyglas is national, but it could decide to investigate the opportunities overseas. Now, it says that the largest fabricators have national identities. They market in newspapers and magazines, on television and online. And I think what we could say about that is that's actually quite traditional, isn't it? Putting adverts in newspapers and in magazines for your windows, advertising on television channels, and having a website. It's all quite traditional marketing. And that made me think about what kind of newer marketing might there be. Is there the possibility here for the use of social media to market our windows and doors? And does Shinyglas do that? Do they have more digital marketing methods? So we find out a bit more about that when we find out more later on in the pre-scene. But at the moment, I'm just thinking that is quite a traditional approach. And I'm also thinking that is very expensive. And I'm wondering whether, if Shinyglas is doing newspaper ads and magazine ads and television ads, does it evaluate the effectiveness of those advertising campaigns? And I'm back now to management information systems, data analytics. Do they look at the campaign, the uptick in sales, the profits they've earned from it, the cost of that campaign? Do they analyze that out? Do they look at the effectiveness of these different marketing types against other marketing types? And that is something I would very much want to be able to see, because this is costly and we need to know that it's effective marketing. Now, it also says there are many small businesses who serve local markets, and they tend to make windows and doors from hardwood, which needs greater skill and so suits low volume production. Now, what I would say about that is there is an opportunity for an acquisition. If we want to go into the wood frame windows, we could acquire one of these many smaller businesses. But also, if I put all of this together, I'm going, well, actually, this market is quite fragmented. There are lots of smaller players in this market, as well as Shinyglas and the 3 or 4 other larger competitors, which we see about later. But there are also lots of small players. That in reality reflects certainly the UK windows and doors industry. It is quite fragmented. There are few really large players in this market. And that opens up lots of opportunities for acquisitions, for collaboration. What about collaborating with some other smaller fabricator of, say, wooden doors or windows? Also, it points out here that customers can buy one window or more, and commercial customers, such as builders, could order a large number of windows and doors if they're building a tower block or a residential housing estate. And both of those paragraphs really made me think about capacity management in the factory and effective management of operations in that factory. How is it managed? How are orders communicated to the factory? How does the factory schedule those? Do we find that big orders from a builder might cause delays in the processing there and production of windows and doors for our residential customers? Does that cause problems? How do we manage this? And again, it also makes me worried about the fact we've only got one factory. How do we manage capacity in that factory? Are there periods where we are at maximum capacity? Would there be a need to consider new equipment in that factory to enable us to meet bigger capacity? Would we consider owning or leasing or acquiring a new factory? So we are a fabricator then, and that's what it's just talked about. We know already that we buy the sealed glass units from these manufacturers. Points out here, very good opportunity again in the exam. Would there be the proposal, a strategic proposal, that Shinyglas vertically integrate backwards to actually acquiring one of these manufacturers of sealed glass, or potentially goes forward into acquiring one of these installer companies? Remember, I said that at the moment, all of our windows are installed by third-party companies. So Shinyglas kind of has lost a bit of control there. So to regain control, what about the proposal to either acquire one of these installer companies or actually set up our own installation division? So lots of possibilities here. Now, We could vertically integrate going backwards into manufacturing these sealed units, but it does tell us in the pre-scene that it's a very specialist role. And we've already read how it's done. All the liquid glass is floated on molten aluminium. This is not what currently Shinyglas does. So if there's a proposal for Shinyglas to manufacture the sealed units themselves, that would be a really big change for Shinyglas. But they could do it if they acquired a manufacturer. But linking now to the business model, would that actually fit with the business model of Shinyglas? Now, we're often asked this in the exam, evaluate how this would fit. We're not necessarily going to say, oh, they shouldn't do it because it doesn't quite fit. We're going to evaluate to what extent it does or doesn't fit with the current business model. But we might conclude that there is a good reason to actually do this, and that it might actually bring some more other benefits elsewhere in the business model. And certainly we would have better control, wouldn't we? And we might have better control, therefore, of all of these very, very many quality risks that I think we've already seen. Okay, then. Finally, there are these window and door installers. We've mentioned these. Generally, the fabricators like Shinyglas do not install themselves. They contract out to local specialists, so small companies who can fit the windows. And that is what Shinyglas does. We find that out in a couple of pages. What I would say about that is I hope that we can see what a complex industry this is. And if we're a fabricator sitting in the middle of it, which Shinyglas is, we've got all these relationships. We are network of sealed unit manufacturers, of supplier of components like hinges, etc., of suppliers of the UPVC or aluminium frames. We then put all of that together, but we rely on third-party salespeople to go and speak to the customer about what they want. And we then rely on third-party installers to go and install the windows at the customer. This is a complex, multi-layered relationship. And I think what's going to be critical to Shinyglas is having strong relationships with those suppliers they use, with those installer companies that they use, with the sales people who are not employed by them, which we find out in a couple of pages. Relationship management, communication, really important if Shinyglas is going to deliver to the customer the quality they want in the timescales they want. They are wholly dependent on these others within the industry. So this is certainly not a simple industry, and it really relies on good communication, good relationship management. Now, in terms of communication, what I would really like to know, and I keep mentioning management information systems and data analytics. Not only do I think Shinyglas should have very good management information systems and data analytics so they can really understand what's driving issues within the products they supply, but also how profitable each of these many different versions are. But what about technology for communication between all of these different entities within this industry? And I don't know at the moment how sophisticated the communication systems are between Shinyglas and all these other companies or individuals that they rely on actually are. Do they have good IT systems? Now, I'll let you into something that I've seen from a few pages along. They don't appear to have a dedicated IT director. And that makes me worried that in a complex industry with so much reliance on third parties, and so many different variations of windows and doors and different types of customer, that potentially has Shinyglas got the IT systems that it actually needs? That could be a proposal in the exam. Now, the final element of this industry, actually, I've not mentioned this yet, is what happens when the doors and windows out at a customer's place, so whether that's a office block or it's a residential home, what when there's a problem? What happens? Well, there are specialist repairers. So Shinyglas might be informed by a customer that they've got a problem with a window or door. That Shinyglas sold them. Of course, that would have been installed by a separate installer company. And here it's saying that when there are problems, there are specialist repairers who will be used to fix those problems. Again, we are relying on those third parties to do those repairs. So again, we have got this potential, haven't we, for conflict between all these parties about whose fault was the problem in the first place, who is paying for those repairs, provision, how do we manage quality, total quality management to make sure we are reducing the chance of these issues. Lots of possibilities here for risks, for conflict, for communication, for IT systems, data analytics, and resolution of issues. Okay, then. Excuse me again, my cold is getting the better of me. Okay, now a little bit more about the industry in Templand. So there are 4 major window and door fabricators in Templand. Of course, we know Shinyglas is one. So we've also got Westerglint, Easter Slim, and Trenderflat. And we can see, and we already know, that Shinyglas is the major provider in Templand. It's the market leader. And we can see from this that it has got a significant greater volume of sales or value of sales in Templand than the next nearest competitor. Now, the next nearest competitor here is Westerglint. And we are given in the pre-scene the financial information of Shinyglas and Westerglint. And we're going to look at those in the second part of this pre-scene analysis that I'm doing Monday evening UK time. But when we just look at this diagram, we can see that Shinyglas has managed successfully to become a significant market leader in this industry. What we can do from this diagram and from the information below it is actually work out the market share that Shinyglas has, because it says these 4 account for 45% of the market for replacement doors and windows. But that is replacement doors and windows. Let's not forget, and we put this on the left, what about the other markets for triple glazing? Or for, let's think about something else that's very, very similar to double glazed windows and doors, conservatories. So adding on to a house an extension that is not a fully brick construction, it is mainly minimal brick construction and maximum glass in frames to create the outside of the conservatory, and then some form of roof on the top of it. So a single story extension, but very much comprising lots of glass around it, so you can see out right through all sides of it. So this diagram relates to the market for replacement and doors. It's not talking about the whole of the market that Shinyglas could be in Templand if we think about the other opportunities facing Shinyglas. So, using, however, what we are told here, if we add up all of the sales of these 4, and this is 45% of the market for replacement and doors, what we can work out is that actually the total market size for replacement window and doors is about 1.55 billion Templand dollars, and Shinyglas has got about 19% of that. Now, 90%, it's a significant proportion, isn't it? But it is certainly not 60% or 70%. And what this therefore reinforces is that it is a very fragmented market. And at 19% of the market, whilst the biggest market share there is a lot of scope here for Shinyglas taking over another player, growing its market share and developing its economies of scale, improving its efficiencies, reducing its cost base. Now, it could do that, proposal in the exam perhaps, by acquiring one of these three suggested here, because they are the next biggest. But equally, as we've already suggested, they could acquire some of the smaller operators, because we know there are many. We've just pointed out here that there's plenty of acquisition opportunities. Testing us in our financial reporting, F2, how do we account for an acquisition or an associate? Testing us also in appraising opportunities using any of the investment appraisal techniques that we know from P2. All of that absolutely potential in the exam. And in the pre-scenes of the past, we've always given this type of information. And one of the exam variants will normally have in it the possibility of the acquisition of a competitor. Of course, in the exam, just to remind you, there are a number of different variations of this exam. And when you sit your exam, there will be students sitting it who get a different variation to you. So CIMA will have thought of a whole load of different scenarios and different requirements then that they ask you. So we have to be alert and ready, really, to have a very broad mind as to what could come up in the exam, because CIMA will have needed to come up with a range of scenarios because they have a range of different exams students will be sitting. You're not all sitting the same version of the exam on exam day. Okay, then. Just to finish off with, to take us to the end of this session, I wanted to start on the bit where we move now to talk about Shinyglas. Most of this will be therefore finished off on Monday. But the first section on page 10 here about Shinyglas itself is about the history of it. And I think that's quite important because it fits in with the idea of what is this industry about. So Shinyglas was founded in 1962. And if we just think about that from what I've already said about this industry, that was the era of, certainly in the UK and many countries in Western Europe, of houses having wooden window frames and single glazed windows. So at that point, that is probably a really super point where Shinyglas entered this market, because they will have been able to grow in the light of the growing industry, which would be to replace those wooden windows and doors. It says many householders invested in home improvements, including double glazing. And this does sound very much like what happened in the UK, and very much within the same timescales as this did happen in the UK. And it also said that when Shinyglas started, Templan's economy was growing rapidly at that time. So, buoyed up by that, construction would obviously have been significant. Economy is growing. We're building factories and offices and houses. People had bigger wages. They had more money to spend on home improvements. They decided to start, therefore, taking out their old windows, replacing with double glazing. Most of these homes had poor insulation. They were single glazed. So we can see, I think, how Shinyglas grew and how it became perhaps that market leader. It is a well-established company. It's the market leader. It should have a fantastic brand name. And that brand name should enable it to go into new areas using that brand name. It's the market leader. So if it wanted to go into conservatories, or if it wanted to go perhaps into a more niche area of wooden heritage windows and doors, it could do on the back of its really strong brand. Now, it tells us that Shinyglas did grow steadily, which we aren't surprised about, because the industry in Templand was growing, the economy was growing, construction would be booming, people had good disposable incomes. So by 1990, the company was the most established in terms of window and door fabricators. Double glazing was popular as a home improvement. The country has a mature economy and average wages are relatively high. So the country is quite wealthy, mature economy. People do have high wages. There's a high level of home ownership. So what this hints at, I think, is high disposable incomes, the ability to pay for the better quality home improvement. And also, if we couple this with temperatures vary significantly between seasons, warm summers, cold winters, then perhaps that also opens us up again to the thinking about moving into perhaps triple glazing, which would benefit from preventing the outflow of heat, but also preventing the inflow of heat in different seasons. But also, people have decent wages, they have disposable income. So, if there was an opportunity to move into other areas like conservatories or other home improvements, and as I've been reading around about this industry, some of the companies in it are moving into other related areas like UPVC gutters on people's houses and UPVC roof lines, so fascias and uh, soffits. So if we are using UPVC frames, we could also be using UPVC in other ways to put at the roof line of houses around the edges and to use it to make gutters. So the point is, it would seem that ten-planned economy, would be able to take that type of diversification, and there would be demand for it. Now, how did how did Shinyglas, sorry, actually grow? Through quality and customer service. Really important point. That is what their brand presumably means. Any move which would reduce quality, reduce customer service, perhaps would not fit in with that business model. Their products were frequently ranked the best. They've got good quality, but then that says to me, great. How are they maintaining quality? And if now in Templan, if perhaps over the last couple of years the economy has not been so great, how are they going to grow? What if they were going to move into lower quality windows and doors, lower price? Would that fit with the business model? So at the moment, they've grown through quality and service, and we need to remember that. And we set higher prices as a result of that. So again, we're not at the make lots of standard windows and sell them cheap end of the market. We are at design what the customer wants, develop exactly what they want, and then deliver exactly what they want, and the customer is happy to pay for that. Now, they've made good use of advertising over this growth period. And again, it reminds us that's advertising through television and newspapers, heavy financial investment. Again, that reminds me that I hope they are evaluating marketing strategies, evaluating the performance of them, that they've got the data to be able to do that, and they make appropriate decisions about where to put their marketing budget. And it says they've created a strong brand awareness at that point where the internet and social media was not available. Now that makes me worried because have they now, fast forward to 2024, have they grasped fully the internet and social media? Or are they a company, and we've got them in the UK who've recently really struggled? Are they companies which have carried on doing exactly what they've always done and they've not moved with the times? They've not moved with new ways of marketing. They've not looked into the new trends or fashions. So that's an important point for us to consider, I think, when we get further on in the pre-scene. Okay, then. So finally, by 2000, Most homes and commercial premises already had double glazing. Demand for replacement doors and windows was limited. Shinyglas needed to look elsewhere for its growth, and they did. They benefited from the construction industry, new houses, because builders always specified double glazed windows and doors. Several builders buy windows and exterior doors from Shinyglas. Now, I'm thinking that is a big element, surely, then, of their revenue. I would like to see their revenue broken down into its sources, its different revenue streams. Is construction of residential housing estates a really big source of income? And if so, how does Shinyglas manage that very specific type of contract? And that's again where I start thinking about divisions and performance management, performance measurement, and delegation, and how do they manage those contracts? I'm also thinking with this paragraph, and it's the last one I'm going to look at today, is that by 2000, demand for replacement doors and windows was limited. Okay, so 2024 then? Where are we now? And is it now the time that Shinyglas needs to be innovating, finding new types of frames, looking into what other sources are there of sealed units, what type of glass is there? Are there different sources of manufacturing of those that have different characteristics that would suit different customers? Are there different markets? Conservatories? What about the government sector, the public sector? Is there demand from the government for replacement of windows in hospitals? What about other sorts of commercial entities like airports? I'm just wondering what state the industry is in 2024 in terms of, do they need to be now looking at new opportunities in order to grow? And that would give us in the exam the possibility of them giving us lots of different types of opportunities and asking us then to use our E2, P2 and F2 knowledge to evaluate things like contract negotiation, etc. Okay, then. So I think that's a good place for us to stop for today. If anybody has got any questions so far, please do pop them in either the Q&A box that you should be able to see, or pop them in the chat box, because I can also see that one, and I'll be happy to answer them. If you haven't got any more questions or any questions, then what I'll say is, for those of you who are booked on our courses or who are going to book on our courses, and if you want to do that, just go to vivatuition.com and you can do that. For those of you who are booked on our courses, well, I will be seeing you tomorrow at the same time, only an hour-long session, and we're going to look at some aspects of the real-life industry, just so we can feel comfortable with it. If I'm going to see you again, fantastic. I will see you tomorrow. If you've just been here for this session, I wish you all the best with your studies. We will be putting this up on YouTube, the recording, so that you can watch it again. And otherwise, those of you who are already with us for our courses, I'm looking forward to working with you throughout the whole of your studies towards that end goal of passing this exam. So thank you for being with me on a Saturday morning in the UK anyway. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow for more of the analysis of the industry. Thank you, everybody. See you soon, I hope.